Object-oriented programming or object-oriented paradigm. We are taking question and answer on this. What do you understand by class and object? So class, actually object-oriented programming has come from object. So everything is object in object-oriented programming. But object comes from class. First you make a class and then the instance of the class is the object. So class is nothing but a blueprint, a framework or a template for an object. So in order to make an object, you have to make a class and then you can make multiple objects from single class. So these are number of objects which you can create. Since you are making this class, it is a user defined data type. It is a user defined because you are the maker of the class. Inside a class, what we do, let us say I'm making a class, my class. So in this class, we define certain variables. It can be integer, it can be float, it can be different data type. Then can be constants. Then the operations or the methods or the function, whichever way you call it. And this function will operate on these variables. And there are other functionalities also. Please remember, class will not take any memory at runtime. Class, no memory at all at runtime. Okay. Class is not a data structure. Class is not a data structure. It is just a conceptual logical entity. Class is just a logical entity. When we create the object, then memory comes. So when you are encapsulating, see, variable and function are there, so it is called a binding. It does the data binding. Now coming to object. Now when I created this class, I can make now the object. I can use the blueprint and template and now I can create the objects. So object is what we are talking about is a real world entity. That is, it is mimicking or it is presenting the actual real world entity that will have attributes. For example, a class car has certain attributes, properties, methods, but this is just a class. But when you actually do it using an object, when you create a object of a class, then becomes the property of say an OD, method of an OD, variable of an OD. So it is referred to as an instance of the class. It contains the variables, the functions, what we have defined in a class. So this object will call that function. This object will call this variable or you can say access the variable. So object has all the power. Class is just a blueprint or a template. So class does not consume any memory, but object occupies space in the memory. Object takes place in the memory. Different objects, they may have different states or attributes or behavior because you can make innumerable objects. What are the differences between class and object? A class is a template, is a blueprint to make an object. A class, it is just a blueprint. So when you make a class, it doesn't take any memory at runtime. For example, I'm making a class car. You put certain variables, some constant, the functions operating on these data variables or data. So this is a binding also. It is just a template which will give us the possibility of using this template with respect to by means of object. So now this car was a class, but I made a Ford name object, a Toyota name object. So now the object is being created. So a class is just a logical entity, just conceptual entity. The real world entity which you are going to deal in your programming, which you are deal in your paradigm of object oriented is object only. A class shows that this is the data, this is the variable. But actual usage comes when you create an object for that class. So this is a real world entity. For that you have to make a class, of course. So as I said, class is a concept. Like structures, like all these shows you, because it is not a data structure. Class is not a data structure. That is why we are calling it as just a template or a logical entity or conceptual. But the objects are real. When you create an object, then you start accessing the variables, the data, and working on the data with respect to or with the help of the functions. So it is real. Object is real. Class, if you see here, we have data, we have functions which are operating on this data. So class is binding the data and method together in a single unit. So this is a good way of understanding the encapsulation also. Good way of understanding the abstractions also. But object is just like a variable. Like int x, integer x. This is the variable you make normally. So int here is the class, which is the user defined say you can entity, and x is a variable of type int. So here we have the object which is of the type of class. So Ford is an object of type car. As I said, class does not occupy space in memory. Object, when we instantiate, when we make an object, then the object will occupy space in memory. Class, just a template, no memory at all. Class, it is a data type, and this is a user defined data type. Please remember that it is just giving a blueprint or a template for object to be made. So you cannot call it as a data structure class. You cannot call it as any other kind of data type. It is a simple user defined data type. But the object is actual instance of the class. The class, you just have to declare once. Make a class one time, and then you can create millions of objects. These millions of objects can be declared and used as and when required. The objects are only limited by the memory and resources. We use the class keyword to make a class. This is a class, you see, CLASS, class, to make a class. This is a keyword we use. Most of the OOPS languages, they provide this. Some of them does not. So this is the keyword class we use. And what we do in the object, it uses a new keyword to create an object. So new is all about, new gives memory, allocates memory. Like we do malloc, calloc in C. So we use new to create an object. New is by itself is a memory creation. So that is why I am saying when we make an object using new, then only we actually allocate a memory for an object and we start using it. So C++, we use new for memory creation, delete for memory liberation. Okay, class can exist without any object. If you make only class and no objects, it doesn't matter. That is what the abstract classes etc. are. But the objects cannot exist without a class. If you are not making an object, the class, you cannot make an object. So it is not by itself. What are the key differences between class and structure? See, in C, structure was so helpful because the different kind of data type variables can be placed there, and then you can just use as a variable, just make a variable of structure and then start using it using the dot operator. See, the class also works like that. You make a class and then with dot operator or any operator of the programming language, you can just call the variables and the functions. So class is a blueprint. It's just a template from which objects are made. So if we are making a class, say car, this class, we have certain variables we have declared, and we have some functions we have declared. And class is a group of common objects that share certain common properties. So when we make the object of this car, that is the class, the Ford and Toyota, these are the objects, and they are sharing a common property which is defined in your template or a blueprint, which is called a class. So in a class, whatever is defined, that property is now, when the object is instantiated, it has. The structure is just a collection of different data types. It has no functions. We have int, we have float, double, like this you give in structure. So in order to make, say, an employee, you make a structure, name, age, like that. So this is structure is just collection of different data types. Class deals with data members and member functions. So in a class you will have data, also the functions operating on that variables. But in a structure we will only have data members, no functions. In the class supports inheritance, that is you can have a parent, that is have a class, and the child can inherit it. That is, a class can inherit the property of some other class. It can, inheriting the property means it can gain access to the data variables and the functions if they are public, of course. So this is how we inherit. So it supports inheritance. And the structure does not support inheritance. There is no concept of inheritance in structure. Member variables cannot be initialized directly. In class, you have to go through the object. Everything is object. So you create an object, then you start initializing the member variables. But in structure, the member variables can be initialized directly. Means the structure you can this struct is also a blueprint. But you make the variables, structure variables they are called, and then you start accessing the inside values. See, class is just a type reference. It is a user defined type and it is a reference for the object. And structure is of type value. It's a structure type. So class, its member are private by default. In C++, there are various programming languages like C++, Java, they are object oriented. So the members normally they are private by default. So if you don't write anything before the class function or variable, it is by default a private. For example, this class has run. I haven't written anything in front. That is private object. Structure, the members are by default public. So you have to make it private if you want to. The keyword class defines a class. So you have to write a class. For structure, you use a keyword called struct, struct. Then you can make the structure variable and class variable. So an instance of a class is called an object on which the object oriented programming is based. And the structure, the instance of structure is a structure variable. It's a structure variable. While we are dealing with complex data structure, this is useful. Class is the only thing which we can try useful while dealing with the complex data structure. That is why we are saying the complex projects are handled by C++ or Java or Python and PHP. These structure are useful while dealing with the small data structure like an employee detail, student detail, like this. So the class is a very big concept. Structure is a usage concept. What is the concept of access specifiers? When should we use these? First of all, the access specifiers and access modifiers are same. Just a minor difference. So just assume that this is your house. This is me and this is my friend. I can come in your house, so I am public. You have given me public access. That is, I can access your house. My friend, you haven't given him any access. Now he is private. You are not providing him any access. And public private is, these are access. Access means trying to get some certain thing, try to use certain thing. That is the access. So access specifier in object-oriented programming language is access specifier or access modifiers. These are reserved keyword that is employed or used to set the accessibility for the classes. Inside them we have methods and members. So for methods and members, these access modifiers are used. So we have access modifiers or access specifiers. It includes the public, private and protected. These are keywords. So protected is all about, when you use the inheritance. So these are three access specifier modifier: public, private, protected. So there is some other access specifier. They are language specific. Like the Java, there is another access specifier called default. So I am just talking about this code now. We have private, public, private, public. What does it mean? That is, who can access what? If you are protected, only the inheritance class can access. Private, it cannot access. Public, it can access. Public and protected and inherited class can access. But the outside class will not be able to access private. So these access specifier play a vital role. The data abstraction and data hiding all is achieved. The implementation is through private, protected and public only. Data abstraction and data hiding is a concept. But private, public, protected, they actually implement it. Okay. So this is the table where we have showed the private in derived class what happens, outside the class what happened. Within the same class, private, protected, public, all are accessed. Derived class, only public and protected. Outside the class, only public. Okay. See here. This is a class. This is the class name. Now, there is a variable integer with a private access. There is an employee name with a public access. There is a function with a private access. So all the inside material can be accessed by anyone inside the class. Outside class can only access the public material. The inherit class can only access the public and protected the access specifier variables or the functions. Okay. So this is because in object-oriented programming language everything is data. So if you don't provide these access specifiers, the idea of data it doesn't happen because there is no local global here. What are the manipulators in object-oriented programming and how it works? See, manipulators, the name itself is showing that it manipulates certain things. It manipulates what? It manipulates what to be seen. These manipulators can only be used in input and output statement. For example, printf in C, cout and cin in C++. So we have the manipulators just to how to show it to you. So the manipulators are functions. They are just functions. They are helping functions. So they are used to manipulate or modify the input or output stream. Okay. So the modification is possible using in C++ if you are using these insertion and extraction operators, that is these angle operators. The modification of input and output stream does not mean we are changing the value of the variable. Please understand, I just said it is manipulating and modifying the input and output stream. I am not saying it is changing the actual variable value. It is just to show. It is just manipulating and modifying the how to handle, how to show it, not to change it. There are two types of manipulator, with arguments and without arguments. So as I said, manipulators are used only in input and output statements like endline, fix, show, point, set w, set precision. I'll show you some more of them. These are manipulators which control the output format. Whatever you see on the screen, these are going to manipulate it. Only the screen weight, how much on the left you have to see, right you see, the numbers, how much numbers you want to see, like the end line. End line just terminate that line and takes your cursor to the next line. This is your end line, like your enter button in Word or any text document. So you see here, this set W is set width. So when we say set W8 and we want to print 1, so set W8 means there will be 8 blank spaces and the rightmost one will be taken by 1. If I am writing 1 0, 6 places will be blank and 1 0 will be shown on the right. Similarly 100, on the right we have 100 and then we have other 5 places. If you put set fill, say you put set fill star, these blank spaces, because blank spaces you won't be able to see on the screen. But when you put set fill with star, the blank spaces will be filled by the star. There is one more thing, set precision. There are certain decimal values which are having lot of precision. For example, 135.456, it can be 4569899 like this. You just want to show 5, that is 3 plus 2 like this. So this is 3 plus 2 means before and after decimal. This is how you do the set precision manipulation. So as I was suggesting, the example of because manipulators can be with arguments and without arguments. So the manipulator which do not have argument are endl, ws flush. With arguments are set w, set fill, set base, set ios flags. Some other manipulators are also there. They are show pose, the fixed, scientific, hex, dec, oct. What are the rules of creating a constructor? So whenever we are dealing with object-oriented programming, we have a constructor. This is automatically given by the programming language. So whenever we are making a class, this is a template. Class is a user-defined data type. And this is a class called calculation. Now the constructor will be of the same name with the name of the class. So if you see here, this calculation and this function calculation, class name is calculation, the function name is also calculation. So whenever we create an object of this class, say using a new or whichever memory allocation you allot, so when you instantiate a class, then the constructor will be automatically called. The class name and constructor name is same. You get free one of the constructor. It is already always given to you whether you want it or not. One, and that is just to initialize certain variables which you don't want to initialize again and again. But you can make, because this is just a function, so you can make functions. So you can overload this function with respect to the input data types. You can always give as many of the data, the parameters, and you can make any number of constructor. But one constructor, the default constructor will always be given to you. First thing is, constructor does not have a return type, not even void. So constructor has no return type. In all the other functions, you have to give certain return type like integer, like float, etc. But here you don't have to give any kind of return type. First thing is clear. See, if you want to initialize, for example, x and y there, whenever we create an object, I want x as 10, y as 10. So that is why this constructor is used. The basic function of constructor is to initialize the variables whenever you call or you make an object. Okay. You cannot make this constructor as static. You cannot make this constructor as abstract. You cannot override the constructor, that is in inherited class. You cannot make the same function with this name. Means you cannot override this. It cannot be final in C. Final means constant. const. So you cannot make it as constant. These are the rules. What are the differences between the constructor and methods in Java? So in object-oriented programming, we have Java, C++, PHP, and Python. So constructor is a method, but method you make. Constructor is already given by the programming language. So the constructor is a function of the class which is already by default given to you. You don't have to make a constructor if you don't want. But method is user defined. You have to make a method with respect to what kind of work you are doing. What functions do you want? So constructor has the same name as the class name. The name of the constructor and the class will be same. For example, I'm making a class, say I'm making add. The name of the class is add. So I am making a function called add. So this can only happen when add is constructor. Okay. Constructor has the exact same name as the class name. Default constructor is already provided to you by default by the class or the object-oriented programming language. But if you want to make most constructor, you can always make more constructor. There is a default constructor, many constructor you can make. But method is like you want to make a set value function. This has no link with constructor. This is just a function which is going to work on the variables you have defined. This is what you want for your class to be performing. Okay. See, the constructor is a special type of method which is used to initialize an object of its class. So whenever you make an object, if you have variables or certain other content here, you always want to initialize these values whenever you create an object, and that is only possible when you have a constructor. Constructor is only provided to you like this. You put x equals y equals 0. So whenever you make an object of this class, this x and y will automatically be 0. Okay. But method is just certain instruction in Java or C++ that you want to execute. That will fulfill the action you want. That is the work you want to do by this class. Okay. This constructor, you can say that it is just related to more through a programming language, and set value or any other function which you make is more related to you as a user. Okay. So constructor is invoked implicitly when we create an object, but for calling this set value, you have to call it explicitly through the object. So the constructor is by itself. The default constructor will implicitly be called. The method you have to call by yourself. Now, if you are making one more class and you are inheriting this class, that is called the say a child class, and this is the parent class. The constructor will not be inherited by the subclass. I am talking about Java. Okay. So methods can be inherited by the subclass. Constructor does not have any return type. Method have a return type. In constructor, in Java, you cannot override the constructor, but method you can override in Java. And this overriding is all about, if you are inheriting, you are making the same function in a different way. Constructor cannot be declared as static because this is user defined. No, the method is user defined. It can be declared static, but constructor cannot be declared static because it is not you have created. It is the programming language which has given you. Constructor Java compiler automatically provides a default constructor which I have been telling you. Method Java compiler does not provide any method by default. You have to make set value. You have to make get value to get it. How does procedure programming be different from OOPS differ? We'll talk about this in the next discussion. Till then, thank you so much. Take care of yourself.